Welcome back to the Biblical Preaching Podcast. This is a bite-size, and we are going to focus on transitions. Some top tips, in fact, 5 top tips for your transitions in your sermons. Now, transitions are really important. For the amount of time that they take, they are disproportionately significant. Those few seconds between your first point and your second point, between this movement and that movement, those transition moments can make a huge, huge difference. You know, the basic kind of concept of a spoken message is that it should have unity, order, and progress. And your transitions help with all three. Your transitions link points together to show unity. They explain why you're moving on to show order. And they show that you're moving on, which gives people confidence of progress. And so the transitions, although they're brief, they can make a huge, huge difference. A good transition can really make a sermon work. A bad transition can really derail a sermon. And just a plain average transition kind of feels like a wasted opportunity. What do I mean by plain average transition? I mean when you say, okay, my next point is, that's okay. You know, you're telling people that you're moving on. You're telling people that what your next point is. It could be worse. You could do nothing at all, but it could also be so much better. And that's what we want to think about. How can we make our transitions as effective as possible? Just to keep in mind what they achieve. If you're a fast speaker, if you tend to preach at quite a pace, the transitions between parts of your message give people breathing space so that they can keep up with you. If you're a more ponderous presenter, that could be fine. People appreciate the thoughtful, gentle presentation too, but it can give a sense of progress. We're moving on. There's momentum here. And so it can kind of reassure people as well as giving breathing space. A good transition is a re-entry point. You know, people may have left the room because their child was crying and they were called to go help, or maybe they just left the room mentally. Something came to mind, they got distracted, their phone buzzed in their pocket, whatever it was. People can sometimes check out of your message, and the transition is a moment where they can hear a way back in. It's a re-entry point back into the message. It's an opportunity to restate the main idea of the message. And of course, it's an opportunity to set up the next point that you're going to make. And so the transitions are important. Here's 5 top tips for transitions in sermons. Number 1, have a logical journey. We're going to use the analogy of a journey quite a bit here because in a message, you're moving through, not just moving through the text, but also moving through a progression of thought. And some steps are much more logical than others. For example, maybe the section you're looking at and explaining and preaching sets up a question, a natural question that arises in the minds and the hearts of the listeners. You know, this is a big ask, this idea that you're presenting to us. How could we possibly do it? Maybe they're feeling the question. If they are, the transition is easy. You just have to state the question because they're moving in that direction already. But if you're bringing in something that nobody's thought of and you're going to go in a totally different direction, that can be more of a challenge. And so we want to think about having a logical journey. Logical according to the text, logical according to the thought processes of your listeners and culturally and so on. The more sense it makes, the easier the transitions are. Doesn't mean you always have to take the logical step. But if you're taking a less logical step, then you need to make a bigger effort with the transition. Okay, so try to have a logical journey. That's number 1. Now, number 2. With number 2, we want to make sure we slow down through the turns. Imagine that you're riding a motorbike. Okay, I've never ridden a motorbike in my life, but I can imagine what it's like. And you've got a passenger clinging on behind you. As you're going in a straight line, they're okay. But when you go around a curve, if you don't slow down, they may not make it. And you don't want to come out of the curve and find that you've left them in the ditch. And so as you're going to go through a curve, through a turn, you need to slow down. The same thing is true when you're preaching. You slow down through the curves. You create an opportunity for people to be with you, to get what you're saying, to point them in the new direction. If you're going to speed up in the straight lines. Now, I'll tell you why it's tempting to speed up at a transition. It's because essentially a transition has no content. If you think about it, you've studied the passage, you've got a whole load of understanding of the passage, and you've got the sort of theological truths and the applicational realities that you want to present, and you're excited to present them. And so you come to the end of your point and you want to get to the next one. And then the next one, you know what's coming. You've studied it, you've prepared for it, it's going to be good. And so the temptation is to get there fast so that you can get on with the content. You've got to slow down to make sure that your listeners are still with you when you get there. So think about that. On a motorcycle, taking a turn, slow down, keep them with you. All right, now, number 3. Okay, after thinking about slowing down through the turns, let's keep the analogy going a little bit. When we come into a junction, we want to look both ways. On a motorbike, look left and right. Okay, but in a sermon, we want to look backwards and forwards. Doesn't mean we have to always state a backwards reference and a forwards one, but as a default, it's not a bad idea. So we've seen point 2, right? The second tip in this list, we've seen that you should slow down through the curves. Now, let's notice that we should also look both ways. Okay, so look both ways, and then we move forward. That's a transition that looks backwards and forwards. At the very least, you need to be aware of it yourself in your thinking and in your preparation. Where have we come from? Where are we going? Okay, so what do I need to say? And like I said, by default, why not tell them? We've said this, now we're going on to this. It's also a chance to look right back to the beginning of the journey, to kind of hearken back to the introduction of the message where you flagged your main idea, perhaps. Bring that up again. Use it as an opportunity to restate the main idea. You see, the junction is a moment where you can just pause and slow down, review where you've been, preview where you're going. Ready? Okay, and then you speed up again. That's number 3. Look both ways. Number 4, this is kind of a how-to, right? So how do you do some of this stuff? Well, you want to create emphasis vocally. Slowing down, we've mentioned already. You can pause. A pause can be very effective. You can pick up the energy. You can change the volume. There's a lot of things you can do with your voice, but you make sure you vary it because you want to create emphasis that this is a point where even if you've checked out, I need you back with me. Okay, now hopefully everyone's gripped by your whole message and they're not checked out, but let's be real. The transitions are a point where we can bring them back. And so look for ways to create emphasis vocally. And number 5 is like it. Mark the move physically. Use your physical presentation to show a transition. Maybe you've been on one side of the platform or the music stand or whatever you have for the last whole point. Maybe you've just been there. You can almost subconsciously move to the other side for your next point. It just that one little change, or maybe you've been looking more in one direction, now change to a different direction. Use some form of physical movement so that you're subtly reinforcing, okay, this is a new part of the message. Okay, so there you go. 5 top transition tips. Number 1, have a logical journey so the transitions make as much sense as possible. Number 2, slow down through the turns. Number 3, look both ways, backwards and forwards. Number 4, create emphasis vocally. And number 5, mark the move physically. Now, you may have some other suggestions, some other things to add to that. As always, feel free to comment and put in what you've noticed other people doing that's effective or something that you found to be helpful. We'd love to hear more on that. Now, just to close, before we finish, I want to give you an encouragement. And this is a bit of a tenuous link, but I don't care. It's worth it. Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. Paul writes to the Philippians. And keep in mind here, Paul is writing. He's got a message that he is communicating to them. But right in the introduction, he says, he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. So even while Paul is presenting his letter, presenting his message to them, his confidence is not in his communication. His confidence is in God. And here we are thinking about, how can we make a transition between these 4 minutes and these 6 minutes as effective as possible in our preaching? Praise God that he's not depending on us to bring about life change in the people we're preaching to. God is working out a lifetime of discipling, a lifetime of transformation, a lifetime of his rescue plan in people's lives, weaving together highs and lows, difficulties and encouragements, and all the little things that weave together beautifully in God's great plan to bring somebody to the completion of his project for them. He's the one that we're confident in. We want to give the best that we can when we're preaching. We want to wrestle with, how can I make each part of this sermon the most effective it can be? But my confidence mustn't be in me, mustn't be in what I can achieve. My confidence is in God. He's got a plan and he's working it out. And praise God, in his grace, this message that you're about to preach can be part of that. Philippians 1 verse 6, hope that can be an encouragement. Keep our eyes on him. He's the life changer. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll be with you again soon.
Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate every positive review, like, share, and comment. And thank you for praying for us. We hope you will join us again next time on the Biblical Preaching Podcast.